What kind of country burns through 30,000 soldiers in one city in a single month and still calls it progress? In eastern Ukraine, Russia's push for Pokrovsk has turned into something far darker than an offensive. The city is in ruins. The people are gone. All that is left is death and destruction. Yet, the assault keeps grinding forward, as if throwing enough lives at the rubble might somehow make it look like a victory. This is Pokrovsk, a place that's become a mirror of everything broken in Russia's war. Ukrainian defenders, outnumbered and outgunned, are still holding the line while churches crumble and whole neighborhoods disappear under missile fire. But there's something else happening here, something the Kremlin doesn't want the world to see. Behind the headlines and the body counts, a deeper collapse is taking shape. And once you see it, you'll understand why. This battle may haunt Russia long after the fighting ends. Let's step right inside of the carnage. Right now, Pokrovsk is a city on the edge of extinction. The skyline is jagged, torn apart by endless bombardment. Smoke coils from shattered apartment blocks where laughter and music once filled the air. The streets are silent except for the low thud of distant artillery and the mechanical buzz of drones searching for any signs of life. Russian forces have surrounded the city and are closing in from every direction, infiltrating southern and eastern districts with small groups dressed as civilians to see out chaos. At the time of recording this, Ukrainian defenders are still bravely holding the last few blocks with grit, precision, and something beyond logic. There are no civilians left here, only soldiers, debris, and the echoes of what used to be home. Poker isn't just under siege. It's being erased from the map, brick by brick, life by life. To understand why the city matters, you have to look back before the shelling, before the siege was barely known outside of Ukraine, a mining city defined by hard work, coal, and railways. It was neither glamorous nor political, but geography has a cruel sense of irony. It sits in the heart of the Donetsk Oblast, connected by road and rail to the wider Ukrainian defense network. Whoever controls Pokrovsk controls the arteries that feed Minad and the deeper defensive lines that protect western Donetsk. Its position makes it a vital link in this war that makes it priceless. But there's more at stake than logistics. Beyond its roads and rails, Pokrovsk carries symbolic weight. It's a city that refused to fall when its surrounding areas collapsed, a stubborn reminder that Ukraine still stands. For Moscow, the defiance has become personal. Pokrovsk isn't just a place to conquer. It's a challenge to crush. Taking it has become a mission of pride as much as military value. A mission to silence a symbol. That's why Russia is willing to bleed for it. Victory here would be a trophy, a headline, a justification for the blood spilled across the Donk front. They need something to show their people, a sign that this endless war is still moving forward. But for Ukraine, losing Pokrovsk would mean more than a tactical setback. It would mean watching another piece of their homeland vanish under Russian artillery, another scar on a country that has already lost too much. In the simplest of terms, Pokrovsk matters because it mirrors the war itself. Russia fights for land it destroys, while Ukraine fights for life. Within that destruction, both are locked in a struggle that has long since moved beyond strategy or politics. It's a test of endurance and humanity. Pokrovsk has become the stage where that clash plays out most brutally, a place where every meter of ground is paid for in blood. The siege on the city began slowly, almost quietly, as if Russia was testing the city's pulse before crushing it. It started in mid-July 2024 as part of a Broader offensive in western Donbass. Russian forces first targeted surrounding towns, tightening the noose. With each advance, it wasn't a surprise. Everyone saw it coming. The only question was how long Pokrovsk could hold. Once the hammer finally dropped, when the assault came, it didn't arrive as a single overwhelming strike. Came as a grind. Day after day, Russian artillery tore at the city's edges, softening. Targets that barely existed anymore. Drones circled like vultures, feeding. Coordinates to gunners who didn't care. Whether the shell landed on a trench or a hospital, the goal wasn't precision. It was exhaustion. Pokrovsk wasn't being fought over. It was being crushed into submission. Inside the city, every block became a battlefield. Outnumbered 8-1, Ukrainian troops defended homes, factories, and schools as if they were fortresses. When one building fell, they pulled back a street and made their stand again. The fight became personal, measured not in territory gained, but in hours survived. Russian infantry flooded forward in waves, often with little coordination or cover. Many were penal battalions or barely trained conscripts, thrown into what soldiers on both sides now called the meat grinder. Among them were the so-called infected units, formations drawn from Russia's 1,435th and 1,437th motorized rifle regiments, reportedly composed of soldiers with HIV, hepatitis, and other chronic illnesses. These men, some visibly unwell, were sent to the front lines with little more than rifles and a death sentence, a grim reflection of how expendable Moscow considers its human reserves. They advance through smoke and debris, only to be cut down by snipers, mines, and well-placed artillery. For the defenders, this is a war of inches. For the attackers, it is a war of attrition, one body at a time. These human wave tactics were meant to break the defenders. Instead, they broke the attackers. Ukrainian forces adapted quickly, rotating units to keep their lines alive, setting traps inside gutted buildings, and using drones not just for spotting but for striking. In many cases, Russian squads didn't even reach their objectives before being wiped out. Those who did often found themselves alone with no support behind them. For every meter gained, hundreds of men fell. At night, the city glowed orange with the reflection of fires and flares. Artillery never stopped, and the ground shook so often that soldiers forgot what silence sounded like. It became common for Ukrainian fighters to move through tunnels and basements just to avoid being spotted by drones. Some units even lived underground for days, surfacing only to fight and then retreat again. Above them, Russian bombs kept falling, flattening structures that were already half gone. Every Russian attempt to advance cost more lives. Russia's pincer movements from the north and the south began to tighten, but more slowly than expected. Their armor couldn't move through the wreckage, so they sent in infantry. But infantry is vulnerable in a city like this. Pokrovsk has become a labyrinth of death as collapsed walls, blown bridges, streets filled with debris, and craters deep enough to swallow tanks. By mid-2025, the toll was undeniable. Russian command began rotating entire brigades out of Pokrovsk because their casualties were unsustainable. Units entered with 1,000 men and left with 200. Medics said the wounded-to-dead ratio was worse than anything they'd seen in Bakhmut. Ukrainian intelligence estimated that in just the first 3 months of the year, Russia has lost over 45,000 troops here alone, not counting the wounded or missing. That's nearly a small city's worth of soldiers gone for a few square kilometers of scorched earth. And it only got worse from there. In October, Russian losses in the area hit a record. 25,000 killed or wounded with daily, rates climbing to over 1,000 as they poured in 150,000 troops. All of that was necessary because despite the overwhelming odds, Ukraine refused to collapse. They fought with discipline, adjusting positions whenever pressure grew too heavy, making Russia pay for every inch of ground. The defenders used everything they had. Snipers perched in shattered stairwells, small drones, dropping grenades on trenches, even improvised traps hidden in the debris. Russian commanders kept sending reports of progress back to Moscow. But progress in Pokrovsk was an illusion. What they called advances were really pointless. Steps into a moonscape, and between those steps there was silence. The worst part of the siege wasn't just the fighting. It was the emptiness between battles. No civilians left to save. No journalists to bear witness. Only the distant thud of shelling and the crack of gunfire marked time. Soldiers moved through streets lined with burnt vehicles and broken signs, knowing the enemy was close but unseen. Some called it a ghost city. Others called it hell. Everyone understood it was a place where life itself had been bled dry. Even now, the front shifts by the meter, not by the mile. Russia claimed control of districts that changed hands within hours. Ukraine hits back with artillery and drones, cutting supply lines and forcing Russian troops to pause, regroup, and start again. The siege has become a loop of suffering, one neither side seems willing to break. For Russia, stopping now would mean admitting weakness. For Ukraine, retreating would not just mean surrendering a city, but losing a symbol of defiance. And that symbol is fading fast. There comes a point in every siege when the fighting stops feeling like a war and starts feeling like demolition. Pokrovsk is long past that line. What was once a city is now a shadow of itself, an open wound, stretching across the Donetsk steppe. From above, it looks like a smear of gray and black, entire districts swallowed by smoke and dust. Streets that once led to schools and markets now lead to nowhere. Every direction ends in debris. The main hospital, once one of the last functioning structures, was hit twice in a single week until nothing remained but concrete powder and silence. The railway station, once the beating heart of Pokrovsk, is now a skeleton of twisted steel and shattered glass. The platform is covered in shell casings instead of commuters. Even nature has been stripped away. The few trees still standing are blackened and leafless, their trunks splintered by shrapnel. The air smells of wet soot and metal, heavy and constant, clinging to everything it touches. When soldiers breathe, they taste smoke. When they close their eyes, they still hear the ringing echo of artillery that never seems to stop. Entire blocks that once held thousands of people are now unrecognizable. Wastelands. You can't tell where a home once stood, only that someone's life ended there. And somewhere in the Kremlin, a general pens another medal on a map and calls it a good day's work. The collapse of infrastructure is made. Pokrovsk, a place that defies logic. There's no power grid, no running water, no hospitals, no transport. Even military vehicles struggle to move through the maze of destruction. Convoys crawl through cratered roads where each turn could lead to another collapsed bridge or a dead end. Generators hum in the dark like mechanical ghosts, keeping what little equipment still functions alive. At night, there are no lights, only the dim flicker of flares and the eerie glow of distant fires. But it wasn't always like this. Before the last civilians were evacuated, Pokrovsk was home to around 60,000 people in a city, full of life. Now it's empty, not abandoned, but forcefully drained of everything that made it human. Families fled with whatever they could carry, leaving behind homes that were later pulverized by shells. Pets wander through the wreckage. Children's toys lie half burned in debris. The sound of life has vanished, replaced by the monotone rhythm of war. For those who once lived there, the idea of return feels unimaginable. Even if the fighting stopped tomorrow, there would be nothing to come back to. Schools are gone. Hospitals are gone. Power plants and water systems, well, they're gone, too. The cost of rebuilding a city like this would run into the billions, and that's only the materials cost. You can pour concrete and replace windows, but how do you replace the memories burned out of every building? How do you rebuild a soul? The answer is pretty simple. You don't. You redraw the map and pretend the old Pokrovsk never existed. But some losses go deeper than infrastructure. There's also the cultural loss, the kind that statistics can't measure. Prosks, churches, some over a century old now, stand roofless, their domes blown apart. Murals that once told stories of miners and families are now streaked with soot and bullet holes. Historical archives, libraries, and local museums that held pieces of the region's identity have been wiped out. Even the city's clock tower, a familiar landmark that had survived decades of Soviet control and independence, finally fell under a missile strike in late spring. The moment it collapsed, the last piece of old Pokrovsk seemed to vanish with it. Now the soldiers who fight here are the city's only inhabitants. They live among the husks that whisper of lives long gone. Some find shelter in half-collapsed apartments, sleeping beside burned furniture. Others dig into basement, where families once hid during raids. Every room tells the same story. Someone once loved this place enough to make it a home. Now it's gone. It's hard to look at what's left of Brosk and still call it a city, and yet somehow the fighting goes on. Russia keeps sending more troops into the wreckage, trying to finish what's already destroyed. Ukraine keeps defending what's left, not because it's strategic anymore, but because it's sacred, because Brosk has become more than a dot on a map. It's a line drawn in blood that neither side can afford to erase. The Russian army has turned it into a conveyor belt of bodies. Fresh recruits arrive from across the country, some barely trained, others pulled from prisons and penal units. They're given rifles, told where to go, and sent forward into the same streets that swallowed the last wave. Most don't last very long. Ukrainian drones spot them before they even reach cover. Artillery finishes what the drones start, and when they fall, another steps over them and keeps walking until they too are gone. What makes it even more grotesque is how little this reality seems to matter to those given the orders. Kremlin officials talk about morale and momentum, while the soldiers in Pokrovsk sleep in holes and bleed out under collapsed roofs. The rotation schedule is chaotic. Units that should have been pulled out weeks ago are still fighting, patched together with replacements who barely know their commander names. Exhaustion hangs over everything. Soldiers move like ghosts, running on instincts and fear. Some stop caring about the mission altogether as survival becomes the only strategy. And when survival becomes the only goal, discipline begins to fracture. There are whispers from captured radio traffic of mutinies and refusals to advance, of officers shot by their own men after, forcing them on another suicidal charge. Whether every rumor is true or not doesn't really matter. What matters is that they exist. They speak to the level of despair that has taken root inside of Russia's ranks. After all the failed assaults where no one's left a report back, still, the Kremlin insists the losses are sustainable. They call the fallen heroes of the motherland martyrs, for a cause no one could define anymore. The state media celebrates each advance, as if it's a turning point carefully, avoiding the simple truth. Russia is trading men for scorched earth. It's a kind of blindness that borders on cruelty. The generals see body counts as statistics. The politicians see them as proof of determination. But on the ground, every statistic is a face, a life cut short for a few meters of dirt. Russian medics describe scenes that defy reason. Field hospitals overflowing with wounded men missing limbs, their uniforms soaked in blood and dust. Supplies are so short that some are treated without anesthesia. Many don't survive the trip back to the rear. The chain of command buries them quickly, both literally and figuratively, recording deaths as missing in action to soften the blow. Families back home get a letter and a medal, but never the truth. It's no wonder that morale has collapsed so badly. The myth of invincibility that once surrounded the Russian army has evaporated in the smoke. Over Pokrovsk, conscripts whisper about desertion. Veterans stare blankly at walls, unable to explain why they're still there. The promise of glory that drove them into the fight has been replaced by dread. They no longer believe that they're winning. They're simply surviving long enough to be replaced. And yet, the machine keeps turning. For every unit broken, another arrives. It's a cycle that feeds on denial and propaganda, and it's dragging an entire generation of Russian men into oblivion. Pokrovsk has become a symbol of that madness, a place where strategy has given way to sheer sacrifice. This isn't warfare anymore. It's self-destruction, dressed up as conquest. And yet still, they come because Moscow is convinced itself that capturing Pokrovsk will mean something, that the world will see it as a triumph instead of tragedy. But even if Russia plants its flag over that wreckage, what victory is that? They will inherit a corpse of a city and the ghosts of the men they buried to get it. The cost is so obscene that even a win feels like defeat. Ukraine has paid a price, too. Of course, defenders have lost around 10,000 troops since the start of 2025 in the Donetsk grind, with perhaps 5,000 tied to Pokrovsk itself. Units rotate out battered medics, overwhelmed by shrapnel wounds and drone strikes that leave no room for error. But those numbers are a fraction of Russia's hemorrhage, a drop in the bucket next to the hundreds of thousands that Moscow has thrown away in Donetsk. This year alone, Ukraine's losses sting. They demand every ounce of resolve, but they don't break the line that Russia's do. And still, somehow Pokrovsk hasn't fallen. Through the smoke and the endless shelling, there are flashes of life that refuse to die out. In the cellars of collapsed buildings, Ukrainian soldiers patch up their wounded, reload, and get ready for another day that shouldn't even be possible. Their world is reduced to debris and dust. Yet, they hold the line with a quiet kind of fury. Some haven't slept in days. Some haven't seen the sunlight in weeks. But they keep fighting because the city, or what's left of it, has become a symbol too powerful to let go. When you watch them, you see more than soldiers. You see the last pulse of a city that refuses to stop breathing. There's no glamour here, no dramatic speeches, just determination, forged from loss and loyalty. They fight for each other, for the people who once filled these streets, for the idea that Ukraine can still stand tall even when the ground beneath them is gone. Their radios crackle with short, calm commands. Their movements are sharp, practiced, and automatic. Every counterattack, every ambush, every drone strike they pull off in these husks feels like a statement. Pokrovsk may be surrounded, but it isn't broken. If Russia captures the city, and they are close at the time of researching this. They will call it a victory. They will paint it in bold letters across state. Media as if capturing the city justifies everything that has happened inside of it. The Kremlin will highlight the streets taken, the buildings secured, and the strategic positions gained. They will speak of progress, of momentum, and of the soldiers who sacrificed for the motherland. But anyone who looks closer sees the gap between that narrative and reality. The soldiers on the ground are exhausted beyond measure. Units have been shredded. Tanks and artillery are destroyed faster than they can be replaced. The victory they claim is built on scorched earth and blood. A triumph paid for in a way that makes the word meaningless. Ukraine tells a different story. For them, Pokrovsk is not about conquest, but defiance. Even if Pokrovsk falls, it will never be just a loss. Holding the city for more than a year is a symbol of defiance, of human grit under impossible odds. Soldiers fought not for glory, but because surrender was unthinkable. Every drone strike that slowed the Russian advance, every ambush and it collapsed, stairwell, every hour survived. These are the true measures of victory. That defiance will travel far. Pokrovsk's stand will resonate in the trenches of future battles and the whispers of soldiers who remember what it took to hold the line. It will be etched into the walls of other towns that refuse to die as a rallying cry. It will remind the world that numbers do not decide everything, that resilience can outlast firepower, that courage sharpened by desperation and purpose can halt even the most brutal machine. Russia may redraw maps, but for every building it takes, it loses another piece of its army. For every mile advanced, it burns through more men, more steel, and more time than it can afford. Pokrovsk stands as a proof that Moscow's advances are paid for in its own ruin. Pokrovsk will never fade from the people's memory. It will live on with the soldiers who held the streets and the families forced to flee. For the rest of the world, Pokrovsk will be both a warning and a symbol. A warning of how far Russia was willing to go to feed its obsession. A symbol of what Ukraine endured to stay free. In the end, Pokrovsk is more than a battlefield. It's a mirror of this war's extremes. It shows what happens when strategy gives way to sacrifice, when propaganda replaces purpose for Russia. It will be remembered as a hollow win. For Ukraine is proof that even under unimaginable pressure, dignity and resistance is still possible. For the world, a reminder that human resolve can outlast even the heaviest bombardment. The city may fall, the ruins may one day be rebuilt, but the memory will linger. Russia may take the land. It cannot take the spirit that defended it. That spirit is permanent. And in that, Pokrovsk has already won something far greater than any flag planted in rubble. You've probably noticed this already, but every time we try to show you what's actually happening on the front lines of this war, YouTube either demonetizes the video or just flat out blocks it. We've had videos taken down for simply showing the truth, not propaganda, not fake clips, but verified footage analyzed with the help of real veterans. Meanwhile, the same mainstream media that claims to care about transparency won't even show you what Russian missiles are really doing to Ukrainian cities. That's why I built Basics Insider, our own platform completely independent from YouTube and free from censorship. It's where we share frontline clips, deep analysis from veterans, and reports you'll never see on mainstream news. This isn't about clicks or views. It's about documenting the truth before it disappears behind the algorithms and the politics and the Only reason we're able to keep this website running is because of you, the fans, the viewers, the people who actually care about what's happening. We don't have sponsors. We don't have corporations backing us, just your support. So, if you believe in independent journalism, if you want to see what's really happening, go to basicsinsider.com. Right now, you can also click on the link in the description or scan the QR code on your screen, because the war isn't just being fought on the battlefield,